Good evening. This is Ben Tafoya. It's April 23rd, Thursday night, 2020. This is another edition of 5 o'clock macro. Once again, I'm recording this a little bit later because it was work and getting dinner ready. In the midst of this crisis, I'm working from home, just like everyone else. And sometimes just get lost in what I'm doing or reading or what have you. And so here you are. But tonight on 5 o'clock macro, I just wanted to take a few minutes to add a couple of things to our discussion of GDP that we've had over the last two nights and talk about a couple of weaknesses and then introduce the topic of economic growth, which is sort of critical to understanding, I think, the information that we're going to see over these next several weeks or months related to economic performance as a result of the crisis. I think it's helpful to have a little bit of foundational information in that realm. So the previous episode, I've talked a bit about weaknesses of GDP as a measurement. And there's one thing I didn't mention that I should have actually at the top, which is that in GDP, we don't account for extraction and the despoiling of the environment. So the increased presence of climate change in our world community as a result of the continued use of fossil fuels and other types of wasteful sources of energy and sources of consumption. These actually get factored into GDP when you pump a barrel of oil out of the ground and transform it into gasoline or natural gas or heating oil or what have you. Those are transactions that get recorded in GDP. But as I indicated, just as there's no deduction from GDP from a natural disaster like a tornado or a hurricane, there's no deduction from GDP for drinking water being ruined or poisoned by coal ash or the loss of a mountaintop from strip mining or the climate devastation from burning of fossil fuels and the runoff from fracking. All that kind of stuff doesn't subtract from GDP, though it will have a negative impact on folks' quality of life. Now, I did indicate that GDP also doesn't tell us about income inequality, but there are some statistics that we can look at. So if we do a simple calculation of U.S. Current dollar GDP, which I gave you for 2019, was something like $60,000 per person in the United States. So you think about it for a minute and you say, wow, that's a lot. And if the average family is between 3 and 4 people, that's $180,000 to $240,000. There are very few families in the United States that have that kind of annual income, and that's correct. In fact, the median family income in the United States is about $78,000, and we can see those statistics here. I had mentioned previously the website FRED, which is from the Federal Reserve Board of St. Louis. And so this graphic is an indication of median family income in the United States from FRED over a period of time. You can see the growth from last decade. The numbers, most recent numbers they have is for 2018. You can see it topping $78,000. So that gives you some indication of how much inequality there is, that instead of having income between $180,000 and $240,000, median family income is $78,000, and the median again is the midpoint in the income range. Now, not all of GDP would flow to individuals as income. There are some that's lost for other purposes, such as depreciation. But you, I think, can see that that stark difference. There is actually a measure of family income inequality that's used to compare one country to another, and that's called the Gini coefficient or Gini index. I think more commonly index, where we're measuring the distance between total equality in income across the society versus total inequality. And so you would expect to see, for more equal societies, a lower index. And we see information on income inequality from a website called the World Factbook, which is actually published by the CIA. It's extremely useful compendium information about various countries. And you can see that the countries that have the worst performance in terms of income inequality are, generally speaking, low-income countries, many of whom are still sort of going through the development phase. And really that the United States winds up being at number 39 on this list and a Gini index of 45. The advanced economy with the worst issue of income inequality. And you have to go way down to start running into other countries, like the UK is at 32, so it's a long way from, as is Canada, from 45 as an index to 32. And at the bottom, sorry about that, you'll see a country like Sweden at 25. And there are all kinds of reasons, which we'll talk about in a minute here, why countries have different levels of inequality. But GDP doesn't comment on that. It tells us about production. So we get to this issue, then how do economies grow? There's a simple answer, which is you just add to GDP. You add to consumption or investment or government spending or net exports, and voila, your economy is growing. The thing is that it's not quite that simple, because there are things that underlie the engines of the economy, if you will, that may not actually translate that easily into the formula. So that's what we're kind of concerned about here. And let me explain that a little bit more, in that there are constraints, some political. How much is the government willing to actually spend to boost G? This is an issue that we're dealing with right now today, as Congress struggles with how to plug this gap in our economic performance. But another sort of common constraint would be the capability of having growth based on exports. So this is a tried and true strategy. Many countries have attempted it, and some have succeeded. So Germany, for instance, in 2018 had a trade surplus with the rest of the world of $289 billion. And the United States that same year had a trade deficit of $491 billion. So here's some data from the World Bank showing that. So you can see that the German surplus, the above the line here, is more than offset by the U.S. deficit. And it's a way of indicating that for every surplus dollar that a country like Germany generates, there has to be an offsetting deficit dollar somewhere else. So the United States, for instance, runs significant trade deficits with Germany and China. We run surpluses with a few countries, but overall, as you can see, we're running a deficit with the rest of the world. And that means the U.S. can't have export-driven growth. Many other countries can't have export-driven growth because there's no room in the world economy for them to run a surplus. So that's why we say for every surplus that there must be an offsetting deficit. Now, there is a model, this is a very simple model of economic development, which is based on what we call factors of production. And in a textbook like McConnell and Brew, or Krugman's textbook, or any of the others, really, there's some variation on this that is taught. And that the four elements are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurial ability. Land's obvious. You have a geography that is encompassed within your country and its economy. Labor would be the workforce that the nation has. Capital would be the money that's available for investment and how it is actually invested. And then entrepreneurial ability is the capability of using land, labor, capital to do something productive. And there are all kinds of issues with these various concepts. With land, the United States has lots of land, or geographically a large country, as well as having a large population. And the land became more valuable once we figured out how to irrigate it. There are obviously issues there, but our most rich agricultural area in the United States is in California, an otherwise dry area that uses significant water resources to support agriculture. But that generated lots of production. Labor, the same kind of issue. And we have a large population, so we have a large workforce, 150 million people in our workforce. And so you can increase the value of these factors of production by either increasing their quantity or their quality. So for labor, basically population grows over time. So we're increasing the quantity of labor because people will finish school and they'll go into the workforce. And as long as you have more people entering the workforce rather than folks leaving it through retirement, you'll have a growing quantity of labor. But an important point is how do you increase the quality of labor? Land, you increase the quality by doing something like irrigation, or, for good or ill, fracking, which helps you generate mineral wealth out of land. But for labor, you can increase productivity by further education, training, or higher pay for your workforce that will give them tools or motivation to actually produce more for your economy. Capital, is something that's generated through savings in a society. That's the sort of the typical economic model. And we'll resume our discussion, a short discussion, on this model after a break.